I spent my entire savings to pay for my daughter to attend her dream college, but when it was time for her graduation, I called her only to hear that she had her graduation 2 weeks earlier. She said, "You didn't fit in, Dad. You are only a plumber, and I only wanted the best people there." I was heartbroken and confused. Then her mom said, "She is right. You paid for her fees, but she has the right to choose who should attend her graduation." What happened next was rather unexpected. I will tell you everything. First, if you enjoy these kinds of stories, support us by subscribing to this channel. Click on the like button and tell us where you are watching us from in the comments section. Now let me tell you how everything unfolded. When people asked what I did for a living, I never hesitated. I told them I was a plumber, and I said it with pride. I worked with my hands, solved problems, and came home every night exhausted but honest. There was a quiet dignity in that kind of work, and for most of my life, I thought that was enough. I didn't grow up with much, so when I became a father to my daughter Lily, I swore she'd never feel the weight of poverty like I did. From the moment I held her in that hospital room, with her mother lying beside me still groggy from labor, I made a silent vow to build something better for her. I may not have had a college degree or fancy words, but I had calloused hands and unwavering love. Everything I did for Lily. She was always a bright kid, sharp, curious, and ambitious. Her teachers would pull me aside during parent-teacher nights to tell me how exceptional she was, how she had the potential to go far. And I believed them. I saw it myself. The way her eyes lit up when she learned something new, the way she always asked why instead of accepting easy answers. From an early age, she talked about getting out, going to college, becoming someone big. I never tried to hold her back from that dream, even when I didn't fully understand it. I just did what I knew how to do, put my head down and worked. I took extra jobs on weekends, snaked drains in the winter cold, crawled through attics in the summer heat. Every dollar I made, I tucked away. My knees started giving me trouble by the time she was in high school, and my back felt like it belonged to a man twice my age, but I kept going because I had a purpose. By her senior year, the college brochures started piling up on the kitchen table. Fancy places with long names and price tags that made my stomach churn. I tried to smile when she showed them to me, even when I was secretly Googling tuition costs at midnight while soaking my hands in warm water. "You don't have to worry, Dad," she'd say with that sweet confidence only teenagers have. "There's financial aid, and I'll get scholarships." And she did, to be fair. She earned some, but not enough. Not for the school she finally chose. An elite university across the country where the air practically smelled like money. Her acceptance letter came with gold embossing and a packet of instructions that read more like an invitation to a royal court than a college. She was ecstatic. Her mother cried. And I said congratulations and locked myself in the bathroom so they wouldn't see me cry, too, but for different reasons. Paying for it meant draining the account I'd been building for 2 decades. I had always called it the rainy day fund, but I guess I never expected the storm to look like this. I sold the truck I loved, my first big purchase after years of renting beat-up vans. I canceled my insurance and switched to the public plan. I even cashed out the small retirement savings I'd scraped together. People told me I was crazy, that she could have taken out loans like everyone else. But I wanted her to start life without chains. I wanted her to know that someone believed in her so much. He'd give up everything just so she could stand on that stage in a cap and gown and feel like she belonged. I pictured the moment 100 times, her name echoing in the auditorium, the applause, the photo of us standing together, me in my work boots and her in her academic robe. The house felt quieter after she left. Too clean, too still. I kept her room the way it was, even made her bed some mornings just to feel useful. I'd text her now and then, send photos of the dog, or ask if she needed anything. Most of the time, she replied late and short. "Busy with finals," she'd say. "In class, can't talk." I chalked it up to college life. It wasn't personal. I knew she was just adjusting. And I was okay with that, because I believed she'd come back to me eventually. That someday, she'd see what I'd done for her and be proud, not just of where she came from, but of who raised her. That belief kept me warm on cold nights, especially the ones when I worked late just to make up for the money I no longer had. As her graduation date got closer, I began making plans. I asked for time off work, bought a cheap plane ticket, even found a secondhand suit from a thrift store. I didn't care if I looked out of place next to the other parents in designer shoes and private jets. I was going to be there, front and center, clapping louder than anyone else. I called her a few weeks ahead to ask about hotel suggestions. The line was quiet for a second. Then she said, "Dad, I already graduated." At first I thought I'd misheard. "What do you mean already? I thought it was next month." Her voice changed, cold, sharp. "We had it 2 weeks ago. It wasn't a big deal." I sat there stunned, the phone still against my ear. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked. And her answer hit harder than any pipe wrench to the chest. "Because you wouldn't fit in, Dad. You're only a plumber." I wanted the best people there. My world stopped spinning for a moment. I thought maybe she was joking, but she wasn't laughing. My mouth went dry, and all I could say was, "I paid for that education, Lily." Her voice didn't waver. "I know, but it was my day, and I had to make choices." Then came the final blow. Her mother chimed in from the background, probably on speaker. "She's right, you know. You gave her the tools, but she has the right to decide who she wants there." I couldn't believe it. This was the same woman who once told me she respected me more than any man she'd ever met. The same woman who used to say I was the glue holding everything together. But now, they both sounded so certain, so rehearsed, like this had been discussed and decided long before I ever dialed the number. I hung up without another word. I didn't scream or cry. I just stared at the wall until the silence in the room felt like it was pressing down on my chest. Everything I'd done, every pipe fixed, every back-breaking day, every sleepless night worrying about tuition, meant nothing to them. I wasn't good enough to stand among the best people. That night, I walked into the hallway, opened the door to the guest room where her mother had been staying, and said, "You both need to leave. Tonight." She looked stunned for a second, but didn't argue. Maybe she knew I was done. Not out of anger, but out of clarity. I had spent my whole life trying to prove my worth to people who had already decided I wasn't enough. And in that moment, for the first time, I realized the truth. I had always been more than enough. They were just too blind to see it. I didn't sleep that night, not a wink. I sat on the edge of my bed with the same clothes I wore during the call, the room lit only by the dull orange glow of the street lamp outside. My hands kept clenching without me telling them to, fingers curling like I was gripping a wrench, like there was still something to fix. But there wasn't. There was nothing left to repair. I kept hearing her voice over and over. "You're only a plumber." The words rang louder than any of the machinery I'd worked with. I had imagined hearing her name called on that graduation stage 100 times. But in none of those daydreams did she erase me from the picture. I had believed my sacrifice had earned me a place in that moment, that my love, quiet, unglamorous, but unshakable, would always mean something. But to her, I was just an embarrassment in a room full of lawyers' sons and surgeons' daughters. I made coffee at 4 in the morning, not because I wanted it, but because it gave my hands something to do. The sound of the drip, the hum of the old maker. It was a kind of white noise, just enough to keep the grief at bay. I stared out the window at my quiet neighborhood. Every house dark, every home asleep, everyone still believing that love was enough. I wanted to scream, to punch something, to demand an answer to a question I didn't even know how to ask. But the truth was sitting right there in my kitchen chair, clear as day. I had been used. Not maliciously, maybe, but used all the same. They had taken what they needed from me, my savings, my support, my stability, and once they had what they wanted, they cut the cord. I wasn't useful anymore. I was expendable. And nothing makes a man feel more invisible than realizing the people he gave everything to never really saw him in the first place. By sunrise, I had made my decision. Her mother, Diane, had been staying with me on and off since Lily left for school. We weren't together, not romantically, but she had a way of drifting back into my life when it was convenient for her. I let it happen because it made the house feel less empty, because it was easier than being completely alone. But that morning, I walked to the guest room and knocked once. She opened the door with bedhead and a robe, blinking like she'd forgotten where she was. "You need to go," I said simply. "Now." At first, she laughed. Thought I was kidding. Then she saw my face. "Come on, don't be dramatic," she tried. "She's just a kid. She made a mistake." But it wasn't a mistake. A mistake is forgetting to call. A mistake is booking the wrong hotel. What Lily did, what they both did, was deliberate, cold, calculated. Get your things, Diane, I said again. And this time, she listened. She left without much of a fight, which honestly hurt more than if she'd begged. Part of me wanted her to say, "You're right. I'm sorry. This was wrong." But she just shrugged, muttered something about how I was overreacting, and rolled her suitcase out the door like she was heading to brunch. I stood there as the door clicked shut, and the silence that followed wasn't peaceful. It was heavy, but it was mine. And for the first time in years, I realized I needed to reclaim more than just my home. I needed to reclaim my self-respect. Over the next few days, I started erasing traces of both of them. I packed Lily's room into boxes. I didn't throw anything away, at least not yet, but I couldn't keep walking past her posters and trophies like nothing had changed. I took down the framed photo from her middle school graduation, the one where she was smiling, and I was holding her with grease-stained hands. I put it in a drawer I never opened. The silence in the house grew deeper, but I filled it with action. I cleaned out the garage, fixed the leaky faucet in the hallway, replaced the porch light that had flickered for months. I did the things I knew how to do, things that responded when I touched them, that bent and shifted when I applied pressure. Not like people, not like them. But no matter how much I kept moving, I couldn't escape the questions in my head. Did I raise her wrong? Did I love her too much? Not enough? Was it my fault for shielding her from struggle, for making her life too easy? Maybe if she had taken out loans, worked part-time, felt the sting of real sacrifice, she wouldn't have been so quick to write me off. Or maybe she would have resented me anyway. Maybe she would have said, "Why didn't you do more?" That's the part that stung the most, not knowing if there was ever a version of this story where I wasn't the one left behind. I had worked my whole life believing that love meant sacrifice, and now I was starting to wonder if that belief had cost me everything. One night, I sat at the kitchen table with a drink in hand, a rare thing for me. I'm not a heavy drinker, never have been. But that night, I poured 2 fingers of whiskey and stared at my reflection in the dark window. I looked tired, older than I remembered, like a man who had been squeezed dry and left hollow. And then I heard my own voice whisper something I didn't expect. "You deserved better than this." I wasn't sure if I meant Lily or myself. Maybe both. Maybe neither. But I said it again, louder this time, like I was daring the walls to disagree. You deserved better. And finally, I believed it. A few days later, a neighbor named Jack came by. He's a retired electrician, a widower like me in all but paperwork. We don't talk often, but he must have heard something through the grapevine. "Heard about Lily," he said carefully, standing with a six-pack in hand. "Sorry, man. That's rough." I nodded, let him in. We sat on the porch and drank in silence for a bit before he asked, "You gonna talk to her again?" I shook my head. She made her choice. Jack exhaled, leaned back. "Yeah, but so did you. Doesn't mean you gotta stop loving her. Just means you stop letting that love burn you." I didn't reply, not because I disagreed, but because I wasn't ready to admit how true it was. The thing about betrayal is that it doesn't just hurt once. It lingers. It makes you question everything you thought was real. I kept going to work, kept fixing toilets and replacing water heaters. My clients smiled, shook my hand, thanked me. And every time they did, I felt a little more grounded. Because out there in the field, people saw me for what I was, someone dependable, someone who showed up. The irony wasn't lost on me. Strangers respected me more than my own daughter. Still, I couldn't stop checking my phone, hoping, maybe, for an apology, a message, some sign that she understood what she'd done. But nothing came, not even a thank you card. And eventually, I stopped expecting one. Because the truth was, I didn't need her validation. Not anymore. What I needed, what I was slowly building, was a life that didn't revolve around people who only loved me when it suited them. And that was a foundation worth building on. After Diane and Lily were gone, the house didn't just feel empty. It felt stripped bare, like someone had peeled the warmth off the walls. The silence wasn't peaceful. It was thick and suffocating. Every creak of the floorboards sounded like an accusation. Every shadow in the hallway reminded me of laughter that used to live there. I kept finding little pieces of them everywhere. A bobby pin in the bathroom sink, a pink hair tie in the laundry room, an old mug Lily used to use for cocoa still sitting in the cupboard. I couldn't bring myself to throw them out. Instead, I boxed everything and labeled it neatly, like I was cataloging memories I couldn't afford to feel yet. Work became my refuge. Fixing pipes, tightening bolts, feeling metal bite against my gloves. It gave me something the heart couldn't provide: control. You can't negotiate with grief, but you can fix a leak. The first week, I worked nonstop. I took every job I could find: houses, offices, even emergency calls in the middle of the night. I'd come home sore, sometimes too tired to eat, and collapse onto the couch still wearing my work boots. The exhaustion was a kind of blessing. It dulled the ache, replaced the loneliness with simple physical pain. When people asked about my family, I told them Lily was doing great at college, that her mom was busy with her own work. Lies came easier than truth. No one wants to hear that your daughter disowned you because your hands aren't soft enough. Besides, plumbers don't talk about heartbreak. We patch, we fix, we move on. That's the trade. But deep down, I wasn't moving on. I was hardening. Every day, I added another layer, another invisible wall around my chest, until even I couldn't tell where the man ended and the armor began. It was Jack, my neighbor, who noticed first. He stopped by one evening after work with 2 beers and a box of screws he'd picked up by mistake, though we both knew it was just an excuse to check on me. "You've been quiet," he said, setting the beers on the porch railing. I shrugged. "Not much to talk about." He nodded, then took a long sip. "You know, my son didn't talk to me for 6 years after his mom left. Thought I was the reason she walked out. Turns out, she'd just been gone long before she packed her bags. Kids, they don't always see who's bleeding for them until it's too late." I didn't respond, but his words stuck to me like grease under my nails. That night, I lay awake thinking about how love can make you blind to your own worth. You keep giving, thinking it's noble, until you realize you've emptied yourself out for people who never planned to refill you. I started deleting things after that: old messages, voicemails, photos. It felt brutal at first, like cutting off a limb, but it was necessary. Every picture of Lily smiling on some campus lawn felt like a blade twisting deeper. I deleted them one by one, pausing only to whisper, "I hope you're happy." The house began to change after that. I repainted the living room, replaced the dining table with a smaller one that didn't leave a chair sitting empty across from me. I even rearranged the furniture in her room, stripped the bed, boxed her trophies and books. It wasn't out of anger anymore. It was survival, because every corner that still looked like her kept me stuck in the version of myself that revolved around her approval. And I was done living like that. But grief has a cruel way of sneaking in through cracks you didn't even know were there. One evening, I was fixing a pipe under the kitchen sink when I found her old drawing taped inside the cabinet, a crayon sketch from when she was 8. It was us, her, holding a diploma, me, holding a wrench, both of us smiling under a sun that said, "My hero." I sat there for a long time, that childish handwriting blurring as my eyes filled. I didn't cry loudly, just quietly, the way working men do when no one's around to see. I folded the paper and put it in my wallet. I couldn't fix what we'd lost, but I could carry a reminder of what we once were before the world taught her to be ashamed of me. The next day, I tried to go back to normal, but normal felt like a language I'd forgotten how to speak. I stopped answering calls from Diane, even when she left voicemails saying, "You're taking this too far. She's just a kid." I didn't respond because I wasn't sure which was worse, that she believed it or that she wanted me to. Sometimes I wondered if Diane had planted the shame in Lily herself, little by little, over the years. Maybe she'd whispered that college meant leaving the past behind, that dignity came from degrees instead of decency. Or maybe Lily had just outgrown me naturally, like an old coat she no longer wanted to be seen in. Either way, it was done. And no matter how many times I rewound the tape in my mind, there was no edit that made it end differently. Winter came early that year. The cold hit harder than usual, or maybe I just felt it more. Work slowed down after the holidays, and I spent more time at home than I wanted to. Nights were the worst. I'd sit on the couch with the TV on mute, staring at the flickering images without absorbing a single one. Sometimes, I'd catch myself listening for her, phantom footsteps on the stairs, the faint echo of laughter that wasn't really there. It's strange how your mind keeps replaying ghosts long after the people have left. That's when I started talking to myself, just to hear another voice. You did what you could, I'd mutter. You did right by her. Saying it out loud made it feel real, even when I didn't fully believe it. Then one evening, Jack knocked again. Come with me, he said without explanation. We ended up at the local bar, a place with sticky floors and dollar wings. It smelled like beer and regret, which felt fitting. You can't sit in that house forever, he said, handing me a beer. You're gonna rust. I laughed for the first time in months, the sound rusty itself. Maybe I deserve to. He shook his head. You don't deserve rust. You deserve peace. I didn't know what peace looked like anymore, but the idea of it, quiet without shame, stuck with me. That night, I came home and stood in the middle of my living room. The walls looked bare but clean. The silence, for once, didn't feel hostile. It just felt honest. I realized that for years, my identity had been built around being someone's father, someone's provider, someone's safety net. I had forgotten how to be just me. So, I decided that night that I would rebuild, not for them, but for myself. I didn't know what that would look like yet. Maybe a new truck. Maybe a trip somewhere quiet. Maybe just waking up one day without feeling like I was waiting for an apology that would never come. I turned off the lights and sat in the dark, feeling the hum of the water pipes through the walls. The sound was steady, rhythmic, reliable. It reminded me that even when everything else falls apart, something simple and sturdy can keep running underneath it all. That was me now, bruised, patched up, but still working, still holding the line. And for the first time in a long while, that felt like enough. It had been 7 months since the day I told Diane to leave, and in that time, I had built a rhythm that almost resembled peace. I woke early every morning before the sun had fully risen, brewed a pot of strong coffee, and sat at the kitchen table reading the local paper like my father used to do. The quiet was no longer suffocating. It had softened into something I could live with. My business had picked up again, mostly word-of-mouth referrals. People appreciated that I showed up when I said I would, did the job right, and charged a fair price. That kind of honesty still counted for something, at least in the real world. I began to smile again, small, guarded smiles, the kind that felt like testing the waters of my own recovery. Life wasn't perfect, but it was stable, and after the chaos of betrayal, stability was a gift. Then one evening in late March, the phone rang. It was the kind of ring that seemed to pierce the air, cutting through the ordinary hum of the house like a blade. I almost didn't answer. I had grown used to silence and had learned to appreciate the absence of bad news. But something made me pick it up. The voice on the other end was unfamiliar at first, calm, professional, but with a tremor of urgency beneath the words. Mr. Hanley? This is Dr. Strauss from Mercy General. Are you the father of Lily Hanley? My chest tightened immediately. I hadn't heard her name spoken aloud in months. I gripped the phone tighter. Yes, I said carefully. Is she all right? The pause that followed felt like an eternity. Your daughter's been admitted to the hospital, the doctor said gently. She's stable now, but she's developed a rare autoimmune condition affecting her blood. We've tested all available family members, and it appears you're the only viable match for a transfusion. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. The words didn't fully register. It was like my brain had split in two, one half hearing the medical explanation, the other half stuck on the simple fact that my daughter, the same girl who told me I wasn't good enough to attend her graduation, was lying in a hospital bed needing something only I could give. The doctor's voice blurred in and out, explaining procedures and logistics, but all I heard was the pounding of my own heart. You're the only match, he repeated. I didn't ask why Diane hadn't called me herself. I didn't ask if Lily had asked for me or if she even knew they were contacting me. I just said, I'll be there. Because even though my pride had taken a beating, my instincts hadn't changed. When something's broken, you fix it. That's what I did. That's who I was. The hospital was an hour away, but the drive felt longer. The whole way there, my mind played through the memories I had tried to bury. Lily's first steps, her laugh when she lost her first tooth, the way she used to run into my arms after school, smelling like crayons and playground dust. I thought about how quickly those moments had faded into distance and silence. By the time I parked, my hands were shaking. The fluorescent lights of the hospital hallway made everything feel colder than it needed to be. A nurse guided me through paperwork, explaining the process as though I might refuse. She didn't know that saying no had never once been in my vocabulary when it came to my daughter. As they drew my blood and prepped the transfusion, I caught sight of Lily through a small window. She looked pale, smaller somehow, her once bright eyes dull with exhaustion. Seeing her like that cut through every layer of resentment I'd built up. They kept me in a recovery area afterward, hooked up to fluids and resting under thin hospital blankets. The nurse, a kind woman with silver streaks in her hair, came by and said softly, "She's lucky to have you." Not every parent would have shown up. I nodded but didn't answer. Lucky wasn't the word I would have used. I didn't feel noble. I didn't feel like a hero. I just felt tired. The act itself, the donation, wasn't about forgiveness or reconciliation. It wasn't about proving anything to her or her mother. It was about doing the right thing even when no one deserved it. I had spent my whole life believing that decency wasn't transactional. You don't do good because it earns you love. You do good because it's who you are when no one's watching. When I was cleared to leave, I didn't ask to see her. I didn't want to stand at her bedside like some ghost from her past, awkwardly waiting for permission to exist. I knew that if I saw her face, I might lose the strength I'd built, and I couldn't afford that. So, before I left, I asked one of the nurses to give her a note I'd written on the back of a discharge form. It was only a few lines, but they carried everything I wanted to say. This doesn't mean we're okay. It means I'm still a better person than you think I am. I folded it neatly and watched as the nurse tucked it into the pocket of her clipboard, promising to deliver it. Then I walked out of that hospital into the crisp night air, the streetlights buzzing overhead like an indifferent applause. The drive home was silent except for the sound of the tires on the wet road. My chest felt heavy, but not from regret, more from clarity. I had done what I came to do. I had been the man I had always been, the man they had refused to see. And as strange as it sounds, that gave me peace. For years, I had lived under the shadow of their judgment, believing their approval somehow validated my worth. But that night, as I drove home under a sky full of indifferent stars, I realized I didn't need their respect to keep being the kind of man I could respect myself. I had shown up, I had helped, and I had walked away with my dignity intact. That was more than they could say. The next morning, Diane called. I almost didn't pick up, but curiosity got the better of me. Her voice was cautious, brittle. "She's asking about you," she said. "She wants to thank you." I exhaled slowly. "She doesn't need to," I replied. "Just tell her to take care of herself." There was a pause, then Diane whispered, "You really still won't come see her?" I swallowed hard, staring at the coffee steaming in my mug. "No," I said finally. I already saw everything I needed to. Before she could argue, I hung up. After that, I went back to work like nothing had happened. I fixed a burst pipe at a restaurant, repaired a water heater for a young couple who couldn't stop arguing, and unclogged a drain at an elementary school. Life had a funny way of moving forward, whether you were ready or not. But inside me, something had shifted. I wasn't angry anymore, not the way I had been. I didn't forgive them, but I no longer carried their betrayal like a weight. It had turned into something else, something steadier, cleaner, a quiet strength. Because I had proven to myself that decency doesn't need applause, and love doesn't have to be mutual to be real. That night, as I lay in bed, I thought about how people always talk about second chances like they're gifts. But sometimes the second chance isn't for them. It's for you. To show yourself that you can do the right thing and still walk away. To prove that compassion doesn't mean surrender. I had given my daughter life twice now, once when she was born, and again when she needed my blood. That was enough. She didn't owe me anything, and I didn't owe her my pain. For the first time in years, I closed my eyes and slept without dreaming. Weeks passed after the hospital, and I didn't hear from Lily. Part of me expected that. The other part, some stubborn, aching corner I hadn't managed to shut down, kept checking my phone in quiet moments, waiting for a message that never came. I told myself it was better this way, that our final interaction, the blood transfusion and the note, had closed the loop. But the truth was, no matter how much I rebuilt my life in the silence, there was still a thread left dangling. Not for her sake, but for mine. When someone spends their whole life living in your heart, even if they tear it apart on the way out, there's always a small corner reserved for them, untouched by logic or pride. The knock on the door came late on a Thursday, just as I was finishing a job estimate at the kitchen table. I wasn't expecting anyone. The sound was hesitant, like the knuckles behind it weren't sure if they should follow through. I opened the door, and there she was, Lily, smaller than I remembered, with shadows under her eyes and a jacket too big for her frame. For a second, neither of us spoke. The sight of her brought a wave of memories crashing forward. Her first Halloween costume, her voice calling me Daddy after falling off her bike, the way she used to hug me with both arms like she was anchoring herself. All of that sat behind her tired eyes, and all of it was unreachable now. "Hi, Dad," she said quietly, almost like she wasn't sure if she still had the right to call me that. I stepped aside without speaking, motioning for her to come in. She hesitated, then crossed the threshold. She stood in the living room like a stranger in a museum, eyes flicking to the changes I'd made. New paint, different furniture, fewer photos. It wasn't the home she remembered, and that was the point. I sat down in my armchair, the one with the patch on the armrest, and waited. She sat on the edge of the couch like she was expecting it to bite. "I wanted to say thank you," she began, voice thin. "For the hospital. I didn't know. I didn't think you'd come." I let the silence settle for a few seconds before I answered. "You didn't think I'd come because you stopped seeing me as your father a long time ago." She flinched at that. Not dramatically, just a small wince, like the truth had scraped against her skin. "I didn't mean to hurt you," she said, looking down at her hands. I felt so out of place with you there. Like my two worlds couldn't exist at the same time." I leaned forward slightly. "So you erased me from one of them?" She looked up, eyes glossy. "I was ashamed, okay? Not of you, of what people might think. I didn't know how to handle it. I was stupid." That was the moment right there. The crossroads. I could have leaned into her words, cracked open the hurt, and poured it all out. But I'd done that already, alone, in the dark, when no one was there to see. What I said instead was measured, controlled. "You don't have to explain. I know what shame feels like. I've lived with it my whole life. What I don't understand is why you let it win." She blinked, and a tear fell, silent and heavy. "I was trying to be someone better," she whispered. "But I ended up being worse." I nodded slowly. Better doesn't mean richer or more educated. Better means decent, honest. And you stopped being that the day you decided I wasn't enough to be seen by your friends. She didn't argue. That was the one thing I appreciated about this moment. No spin, no defense. Just truth, raw and late. "I've been thinking about it every day," she said. "Since the hospital. Since before that, really. And I get it now. I really do." I looked at her for a long time, seeing not just the girl she used to be, but the woman she was trying to become. "Do you?" I asked. Because understanding something doesn't always change what's broken. Some lines, once they're cut, don't get patched up. Not neatly, anyway. She nodded, tears rolling freely now. "I know. I had to come. To try." Her words hung there, suspended in the tension between us. I wanted to feel moved. Part of me did. But another part, the part that had been crushed under the weight of betrayal, stayed still. "I don't hate you," I said finally. "I'm not angry anymore. But I can't go back. Not to what we were. That version of us, where I give and you take, and I wait for scraps of gratitude. That's over." She nodded again, eyes cast down. I figured. I needed to hear it from you." We sat in silence after that. Two people surrounded by the echoes of everything left unsaid over the years. Eventually, I stood, not as a dismissal, but as a signal. "You're still welcome to come here," I told her. "But not as a daughter trying to repair a public image. Only if you want to show up as a person. A full person. One who understands what real love costs." She stood too, slower than me, as if the weight of those words pressed on her shoulders. "Okay," she said. "Thank you. For that. For the blood. For everything." She turned to leave, but paused at the door. "You really were the best man I've ever known." I just didn't see it in time. I didn't answer. Not because I didn't believe her, but because the moment didn't need it. Sometimes silence is the only answer that carries enough weight. I watched her walk down the porch steps, her figure disappearing into the dim evening light. When the door closed behind her, I didn't cry. I didn't ache. I just breathed, long and deep, the kind of breath you take after surfacing from deep water. That night, I sat on the porch with a cup of coffee gone cold, watching the stars wink above my quiet neighborhood. I wasn't angry. I wasn't vindicated. I was just settled. She had come back, not to reclaim what was lost, but to confront what was broken. And while I didn't owe her a clean slate, I had given her something better, the truth. We may never be father and daughter in the way we once were, but at least now, the lines between us were clear. I had spent my whole life fixing leaks and unclogging drains, making broken things work again. But some lines, when crossed, need to stay that way. Not out of spite, but out of respect. You don't reconnect something that was severed by choice. You don't pour into a vessel that treated your love like an inconvenience. That was the last line I fixed, my own boundary. Not with a wrench, but with words. And this time, it was going to hold. It's funny how the smallest things remind you of the people who've hurt you. A coffee mug, a scent in the air, the way the light hits the kitchen table just right in the early morning. These details used to sting, little ghosts that tugged at my heart when I wasn't prepared. But over time, the sharpness dulled. I didn't forget. You don't forget the people you raised, the ones you bled for, the ones who cracked your heart open. But what I did do was learn how to carry it without crumbling. My home, once filled with memories of Lily and the dreams I had for her, had changed. Not just physically, though the paint was fresh, the furniture rearranged, but in spirit. It was no longer a shrine to a past version of fatherhood. It was mine now, every inch of it reclaimed. I went back to work like nothing had happened. Pipes still burst, toilets still clogged, and water heaters still quit in the dead of winter. There was something oddly comforting about the predictability of other people's problems. Unlike family, plumbing was straightforward, cause and effect. If something was broken, you could take it apart, find the fault, and fix it. There was an order to it, a fairness. And after a year of emotional chaos, I clung to that simplicity. My clients appreciated the work. They called me reliable, respectable, solid. The same words my daughter once quietly recoiled from. They didn't know how much weight those words carried for me now, how much they countered the echo of, "You're only a plumber." I had made peace with that title. In fact, I wore it like armor. Then one afternoon, while cleaning out my tool truck, I found a small photo wedged between the seat and the center console. It was a printout from years ago, me and Lily standing in front of a science fair project she'd made in 5th grade. Her hair was in braids, her face full of pride. I looked exhausted, still wearing my work shirt, grease on my collar. We were both smiling like the world was exactly as it should be. I stared at it for a long time, that frozen version of us. And instead of anger or grief, I felt something else, gratitude. Because no matter what she'd become, she had once looked at me like I was everything. And for a long time, that was real. I didn't hang the photo back up. I didn't toss it, either. I slid it into an old shoebox where I kept other scraps of my life. Receipts from jobs I was proud of, notes from clients, a copy of the business license I filed when I first went solo. That box, tucked away in the back of the closet, was my quiet reminder of all I had built. Not just pipes and fittings, but a life shaped by my own hands. A life no one could take from me, no matter how they tried to rewrite it. That box didn't hold regrets. It held proof. People in town had started to hear about what happened. Not in detail, just bits and pieces. Small towns always whisper. But surprisingly, no one asked me to explain myself. Maybe they sensed it wasn't their business, or maybe they understood that pain sometimes settles like sediment. You let it lie, or you risk stirring it up again. One older client, a widow I'd worked for many times, handed me a tin of cookies one afternoon and said, "You've got a good heart. Don't let anyone talk you out of it." I nodded, thanked her, and went back to tightening a valve. But her words lingered in the back of my mind for days. Not because I needed validation, but because I realized something important. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't second-guessing who I was. I had been the kind of father who gave everything. Money, time, blood, even forgiveness in the form of absence. And while it hadn't bought me the love I'd hoped for, it had taught me something more valuable. that sometimes the strongest kind of love is the kind that lets go, not in bitterness, but in quiet acceptance. I didn't slam the door on Lily's return. I just refused to open it for the same version of her that had once turned her back on me. If she ever came back again, not out of guilt, but growth, I might welcome her in. But only then. Only if she came not just as my daughter, but as a woman willing to stand beside me with honesty. That was the line I had drawn, and I had learned not to cross my own lines just to keep the peace. Diane reached out once more, a few weeks later. She texted something short. Lily's doing better. She started therapy. Thought you'd want to know. I stared at the message for a long time before replying. Glad to hear it. Wishing her well. And that was it. No bitterness. No back and forth. Just a simple, truthful response. I didn't ask for updates. I didn't offer to visit. That chapter had closed. And while I still carried the memories, I didn't carry the weight. They had made their choices, and I had made mine. And sometimes the truest healing comes not from reconciliation, but from staying healed in the face of new wounds. Spring came, and with it, small joys. The garden I'd ignored for years began to bloom again. I fixed up the shed out back, replaced a few broken shingles on the roof. I even started taking Sundays off, something I hadn't done in decades. I'd sit on the porch with a book, or walk to the corner diner for pancakes and coffee. These moments weren't flashy. They wouldn't go in any highlight reel. But they were mine, and they were peaceful. And I'll tell you something. After a life spent in service of others, peace is its own kind of miracle. I thought a lot about legacy during those quiet mornings. What we leave behind. What truly matters. It wasn't the graduation I missed or the speeches I never got to hear. It wasn't even the lack of a thank you. It was the realization that for all the years I thought I was building something for her, I was really building something inside me. Strength, resilience, self-worth. My legacy wouldn't be measured by the milestones I missed. It would be measured by the lines I drew and the ones I refused to let others cross. As I sat on the porch one evening, sipping coffee from a new mug, one that simply read steady, I watched the sun dip behind the trees and thought, not all leaks are meant to be fixed. Some are meant to teach you where your limits are. Some show you how much pressure a pipe can take before it bursts. And some remind you that even when something breaks, the hands that built it are still capable, still steady, still strong. If you've ever given everything to someone who couldn't see your worth, if you've ever stood alone in a room you once filled with love, know this: you are not broken. You are not less. And you have the right to draw your own line, to protect your peace, to walk away with your head held high. Not out of spite, but out of truth. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is choose yourself. If this story hit home for you, if you've ever been underestimated, overlooked, or written off by the very people you gave your heart to, you're not alone. Tell me in the comments, what line did you draw to protect your peace? And if you've ever had to walk away from someone you still loved, how did you find strength on the other side? I'd love to hear your story. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories about real-life struggles, healing, and standing your ground. Your voice matters. Let's talk about it. See you soon in the next story.